Recently, there's been an announcement that Bubba Wallace will have a documentary made about him and 2311 Racing made by Netflix. And while some people are questioning this, I gotta say, making a documentary on the most notable name in NASCAR right now, a guy who's employed on a NASCAR team by Michael Jordan, it just makes perfect sense. Whether you like or loathe the guy, it makes sense to have him as the spokesperson for the sport, seeing how, by all available metrics, he's the most recognized person in NASCAR across America and possibly even the world. But it got me thinking, what other documentaries could be made involving NASCAR? Especially which ones could be made with Netflix involvement? Well, today I want to really go into that and what my thoughts are on what could happen. So today I want to give you 13 options for NASCAR documentaries that Netflix could make. For my starting point, we're going to go with the starting point of the season, Speed Weeks. This is when every one of NASCAR's top 3 series starts off their year. And I think that this would be a good starting point for a lot of documentaries to be made about in the future. Speed Weeks by many is known as a season within a season. After all, there are no other weeks of the year that teams will be at one track for well over a week and back how it used to be for multiple weeks. Speed Weeks just has an air about it. It doesn't matter if it's during a pandemic or normalcy. It is one of those events, or multiple events put into one, that just hypes up an entire fan base. Millions of people go in watching Speed Weeks knowing they'll be thoroughly entertained. And I think this is something that can be looked at in more depth and at more angles than somebody like me or somebody like a amateur documentary maker could do. Now, going from one super speedway to another, let's travel on down to Alabama to Talladega. I think that there would be an awesome opportunity to have a documentary or a mini documentary made about what goes on in the Talladega infield. I know it sounds like an odd premise, but just hear me out. The Talladega infield is known as like the party capital of the NASCAR world. Anyone from drivers to media to fans, at least at some point if they're prominent, tend to go in there just to see what the hell is going on. Now, I'm not going to say exactly everything that happens in there because I think a lot of stuff would get me demonetized. I'll leave a link in the description below of an interview we did with Randy the Plumber to kind of give you a taste of what the Talladega infield is like. What I think would be great about this one is it's just so unique. No other sport, no other sporting event, no other event in general has this kind of just odd partying redneck vibe. Yeah, it might feed into a few stereotypes, but at the same time, I could see this becoming a viral documentary or mini documentary just off of the fact of how much crazy shit could happen. Now, going from funny to more serious, I think one that might not be good in NASCAR's best interest when it comes to how it's looked back on in its history, but one that is still a really good story to look at in excruciating detail like Netflix does, is Jeremy Mayfield's story. A lot of people know the narrative that Jeremy Mayfield was kicked out of NASCAR for using methamphetamine. Now, a lot of the facts are very hazy on what's happened, and I think that having Netflix go in and see Jeremy's side, as well as possibly members of NASCAR's side if they're willing to talk about it, would be a really interesting way to maybe put some finality on what has been a controversy that, while not raging on, has smoldered for well over a decade now. When it was announced that Jeremy Mayfield had been suspended for this reason, it really did send shockwaves through the NASCAR world. People who watched at the time could let you know that Jeremy Mayfield was not somebody that everyone expected was going to be kicked out of NASCAR for this reason. We had members like Shane Meal and others in the sport who had been kicked out for drug reasons, but Jeremy Mayfield was an established name. Yeah, his career was not on the up and up at the time, but he was an established name and a great talent who had won a number of races in his career. So to hear this, like I said, was extremely shocking. And I think this would be a way to look back on it and really see what was right and what was wrong. And after all, Netflix has done much more mature content based on Epstein, based on Aaron Hernandez, so I don't think that this in any way would not be in their wheelhouse. Now, looking at a more outside of the box one, both for NASCAR and maybe for Netflix or whoever were to make a documentary on it, is the possibility of a street course in Chicago. This is something that currently is being talked about as an option for 2022 and beyond, of having NASCAR go to a street course, more than likely in Chicago. Well, I think that would be something that would be really entertaining, and not only entertaining, but really interesting to look at. The different red tape that would have to be cut through, the different bridges that would have to be made, the compromises, everything about it. There is a way that people can make documentaries about more or less politics interesting. And I think that this would be something that would be really interesting. A worldwide known city having the opportunity to host NASCAR Cup Series' first ever street course race. I think it'd be something very interesting. And seeing how by 2022 or 2023, much of the world would return to what we would say is normal, I think that that would be a way to see how this ever-changing environment changed the course of planning this possible race. The next one I think would be really interesting to look at, I will just title as underfunded. And it's what it sounds like. Looking at the teams at the back of the pack, the underfunded teams, whether they're starting parks, whether they're just above starting parks, or whether they're trying to take that leap from the back of the pack to the mid pack. I think that would be a really, really good way to show a side of the field that the broadcast more or less neglects. Now, building on basically opening the eyes of fans, both of the sport and possible fans of the sport who aren't yet, on somebody who's very interesting would be, and I think this will be a long shot, definitely, but would be a nice documentary on looking back and seeing the effect that Curtis Turner had on NASCAR and the world around him. I've done videos on Curtis Turner, others have too. He is one of the most interesting people. The dude was one of the best drivers, was the most popular driver for many years in NASCAR, and was then kicked out for trying to make a union. And listen, this is just the spark notes. The absolute detail involved in how he was as a person, both on the track and off the track, would be something that I think a lot of people would really get enjoyment out of. Now, again, when it comes to getting NASCAR into a city, I think this can be done more than just in Chicago. I'm looking at Nashville right now, and I think you could title this one Fight for the Fairgrounds, because that's really what's going on. A dramatic fight, both in government and along with in the media, for NASCAR to possibly race at the fairgrounds again in Nashville. For all the reasons I gave about the Chicago street course, I really think can be applied here. So I think this would be one that would be really cool to do. Sticking with old school tracks, let's go to North Wilkesboro. No matter what you think on North Wilkesboro Speedway's status at the moment, what you can all agree on with me here is that the story is a tragic one, but also an interesting one. And I think that Netflix or Hulu or whoever would make a documentary about this could look into how this speedway rose to prominence in NASCAR from the very beginning, the heyday that it had, the fall that it had, and since then, the movement or movements that have been made to try and get this track back. And maybe, depending on what Marcus Smith is doing, you could even follow it to a possible comeback. That would be something that would be a really interesting one, as I think the premise of this documentary would change over time as more information was let out. With Netflix's documentary on Michael Jordan and the 90s Bulls called The Last Dance, many could say from the beginning, why would we need something on that? We all know the story already. Why would we need to have it covered again in this? And Netflix proved through interviews and through research that there was much more detail and many more things to learn about than the public had known. So I think this can be applicable to probably the greatest family drama in NASCAR history, the fall of DEI. Or, as it could be called, death of a dynasty, maybe. Maybe get some of Teresa Earnhardt's side to this. I know that I've made things about it at a very biased perspective, so maybe have somebody come in at a non-biased perspective, learn about what Dale Jr.'s side had to say about it, and then also learn about what Teresa Earnhardt had to say about it. There are 3 sides to a story. One side, the other person's side, and the truth. Who knows? Maybe we might be able to find some more truth. Maybe we've heard it all along. Maybe it's completely turned upside down and we have no idea what it was. Just saying, it'd be pretty interesting. I promise this will be the last one on a specific racetrack. Now, I think that this is one that really could garner the eyes of an entire market. It's the rebirth of the Auto Club Speedway. The Auto Club Speedway is looking to renovate from a 2-mile facility down to a short track. While there's a lot of different perspectives that fans have on this, what would be really interesting is to see the people that are in charge of it behind the scenes, what their thinking is with it, what their expectations are, and what their reactions are to the responses from the fans, both before, during, and after the renovations. Now, another one that would be really interesting, especially for younger fans to watch, is about Jeff Gordon. Loathed to Loved. Right there. That's your title. Loathed to Loved, the story of Jeff Gordon. Because the career of Jeff Gordon right now has really been romanticized over time, the same way that Dale Earnhardt's has. Gordon right now is looked at as one of the greatest ever, who has been loved by fans for years. And while the first is true, the second is not. Jeff Gordon was hated by NASCAR fans for the most part. Yes, he had a large fan base, but when it comes to Jeff Gordon at a track every week, he was the most booed driver every week, while he was winning every week. And it really wasn't until Kyle Busch took over the mantle of most hated driver that this vitriol really disintegrated amongst the fans. Jeff Gordon, like I said, was one of the most hated drivers throughout NASCAR's heyday. So to see him basically turned into one of the old guard favorites is something that I think is a very interesting look at the psyche of NASCAR fans. And with this, you can look at many angles. You can look at Gordon's career while also looking at how he and the people around him behind the scenes reacted to how fans treated him. It would be a really interesting look into what these athletes think as well. Now, the next one that I'm going to bring up here is definitely a product of its time. So I will acknowledge that from the get-go. But it should be about NASCAR's return to relative normality. With the COVID pandemic going on, of course, everything has changed. But I think what would be really cool is to look and see how members of the sport like Steve Phelps, Jim France, Mike Helton, and more react and think through this on how they can bring the sport back to the normal level it was before the pandemic. We can see the public persona that people like politicians, celebrities, musicians, and even members of different sports put up over time. What we don't see is what's going on when the cameras aren't rolling. And I think that would be something that would be incredibly different for NASCAR to do. Just give all access to show what the decision-making process is when it comes to allowing certain number of fans, working with state and government officials. And when it's all done and over, well, we have something to look back on 2020 to hopefully only 2021. Now, I'm pretty sure that anyone who's been on the internet in the motorsports community for the past couple of years will know what I'm going to say as my final choice for what Netflix should do as a documentary. And it's a version of Drive to Survive, which is a documentary series covering different seasons of Formula One racing. And I would say that this has really helped Formula One grow in America especially. So why can't some of this stuff carry over to NASCAR? Obviously, you probably aren't going to use the Drive to Survive name, and it won't be the exact same formula, but being in depth the way that they are and showing different aspects of the sport that could really interest casual viewing fans would be a perfect way, hopefully, to stop what was bleeding and now is just flatlining to possibly making it growth again. I mean, like I said, Formula One has had a bit of a mini explosion in America right now, and really looks primed to become the second most watched motorsport in America solidly. And if it keeps up at this rate, could actually rival NASCAR when it comes to American popularity. So why not have NASCAR try and jump ahead on this? If it even means getting 100,000 new viewers a week, that would be enough to open up opportunities for NASCAR moving forward. So I think this is one that NASCAR really needs to jump on and make a huge push towards when it comes to Netflix or anyone who makes documentaries, and put it out there for the majority of the people to have a chance to watch it. That's all you really can do. Now, I've said my piece. There's been tons of different ideas people have thrown out. These are just mine. But now I want to hear yours. What do you think should be the next NASCAR documentary made by Netflix? Let me know down in the comments below. While you're at it, leave a like in this video, share this video, and subscribe to my channel for more great NASCAR content. Until next time, have a good one.